we talked briefly about professional looking skull drawings, and I wanted to show you some examples of those. So I thought I would start with the Grand Master Da Vinci. So those first couple of sketches, including this one, are by Da Vinci. And he was really interested in human anatomy, so of course he would study the skull and the human body. It may be hard to see here in this grainy slide or image, but he is using hatching for shading, and I wanted to let you know that you have the option of using some form of hatching or cross hatching on this, or you can opt for a smooth look where it's just straight up shading. So they're just different techniques. You can use them in combination as well. So we're going to take a look at some artists who I think have pulled off some really successful skull drawings. And these are contemporary skull drawings. In fact, I just pirated them from the internet so I could show you some great examples that artists have done. Some of these are in pencil and others are done in charcoal. Both this artist and the artist you're about to see next, they're using gray tone paper just like what you're doing, and they're taking a white charcoal pencil or a white pencil to pop the bright parts, the highlights, to make it really appear light. And they are pretty successful at creating volume and texture and having all those different shades of value. So that's what I'm after, and I just wanted to show you these examples. I mean, look how beautiful that is. And they don't have it all heavily outlined. The outline disappears in spots, which is just what you want to get that skull to start to turn. I liked how they showed the different phases of the drawing, just kind of in a similar way to what I was showing you. And this is kind of what's called a vanitas, where it's kind of reminding you that with death comes life, or also that all things must at some point come to an end. But it looks like they're also using some form of toned paper there. They're using dark darks, but mid-tones and some light whites as well. This is more of an illustration, so I know that someone mentioned they had graphite water-soluble pencils. You could do something similar to this using the water-soluble graphite pencil, so it creates almost like a wash similar to watercolor. This next drawing I really like. I don't know, there's something about the rough edges there too that also is appealing, and the background totally helps. And the way that the skull kind of like comes to life, because I think it's because of the spinal column and the rib cage and that almost like expression on that skull's face. But they're doing all the things I'm asking you to do too. And I did want to show you a couple examples of skulls that are not human. And these are also really well handled. They have a nice range of darks and midtones and lights, some cast shadow in there. Nice way of handling the background where there's kind of a gradient going on. It's not all one shade of gray only. So some really nice, subtle, beautiful work. And you've got the texture there too. So those are things I'm looking for. Okay, so last class, what we were really working on was the outline. This class, I want you to focus on toning and adding values. When you're toning, it is important that you go kind of one way with your stroke. And I'm using charcoal here, so I don't have to be necessarily as tight with my stroke, which means I can have a little bit of gaps in between, and then I can blend it in. But if you're using graphite pencil, then I really would recommend that you have no gaps or minimal gaps in between your shading marks. So you go back and forth so that there is no gaps, no paper exposed. And you're doing it relatively lightly. And then you're going to take your blending stump, or you can take a paper towel that's wrapped around your finger and kind of blend it in. So I'm kind of going at a diagonal sort of hatch there. And I would try and get several values to your tone. So it's not just one shade of gray. You have like a little bit darker gray, a medium gray, and a little bit lighter gray. That'll start to help with the volume, and it'll also help you to figure out the shape of the negative space. You may find that when you're filling in one of these areas, one of these cavities, that the shape is a little bit off. So it's a good time to make adjustments to your drawing and get it to the right shape. So in a moment, I'm going to go in with a blending stump and I'm going to blend this all in. There we go. I actually didn't film it. I just did it off camera, but that's what it looks like. And I am using charcoal. I think I told you that before. So it does have a little bit of a different look than the pencil. You don't necessarily have to use a blending stump or a paper towel to blend it. You could just work on top. So it's almost like layer 1 of your shading, and now you're going to go in and do the serious for reals shading. So you do want to look for shadows everywhere. They're even in between the teeth. If you're having trouble doing that, I would squint your eyes, so get them out of focus a little bit and look at your picture out of focus, or try looking at your picture through a black and white filter. So here is a time when you would start to get in some little detail. So I first went to the big shadow shapes, right? I went to the darkest ones first. But there are some kind of shapes, shadow areas that are not quite so dark. They're more in like a mid-tone range. So I'm going to start to get those in too. It's important that you don't ignore any shadows per se. Although if you have the gray paper, you can let some of the gray of the paper do the work for you for those very light mid-tones. And I'm going to be putting in white charcoal on top or white pencil on top so that the white parts really kind of glow or pop out. And I'm using both a blending stump and I'm using an eraser to erase out areas. And I'm soon going to be switching over to charcoal pencils, which are very similar to the pencils that you're using. And they come in different ranges, so they have a 2B, a 4B, and a 6B. Even at this stage, it should start to have some three-dimensionality to it just by popping in those shadows. It should have the beginnings of that, of light and shadow. And in a moment, we're going to switch to some more detailed shading work. So here's when you can get a little bit of detail. So I would start to look for things like cracks or little indentations. There's some weird indentations on skulls, and I believe it's where muscles tie in. So there is a purpose to a lot of these bumps and ridges and cracks. There's an intention there. So you can see, and I'm starting to go over my toning with the charcoal pencil. For what you're doing, you would go over it again with a pencil. So if you're trying to go really dark, I would switch to the 6B pencil and use that. I would alternate between the 6B, the 4B, the 2B. And kind of when you're looking at your reference picture, assign each value a number so you know which one is the darkest one. And I tend to go for the darkest areas first, so I'm trying to get the darks in, and then I'll work my way out. And just remember, things that kind of pop out will catch the light, and things that sink in are more recessed will be in shadow or have a little shadow on them. So this is probably the hardest stage in the drawing because you're putting on detail and it's hard to know when exactly to stop. And here's what I want you to think about. I want you to make this have volume. When you're shading in a skull, the back part of the skull, the cranium where the brain is housed, that is essentially a sphere. So you have to think in terms of volume and form. The bridge of the nose could be like a cone or sort of like a pyramid, I guess, but softer edges. The chin kind of has a mini sphere. So you do want to aim for those 6 to 7 values, different ranges of gray, starting at really dark and going all the way up to some lighter shades. And then we're going to be adding white to it. And we're also going to be putting a background on. So I think the background will take place on Monday. So you can see that there's some more work that I did on this skull off camera. They got in a little bit more detail. I still have not finished with the black yet because there's still a few cracks I haven't hit up, but I have addressed like the spinal column, trying to get each vertebrae kind of individualized a little bit. Okay, this is where I want you to stop today, and then Monday we'll talk a little bit more about shading and how to deal with the background. And good luck. Have fun with this.